In a maximum security prison where love was forbidden and being gay could be a death sentence, two inmates found each other. What started as protection and companionship would end in betrayal, deadly secrets about HIV status, and a murder that could have been prevented. This is the story of how institutional failure, hidden medical records, and a toxic relationship turned a place meant for rehabilitation into a killing ground. Before we begin, I need to tell you something that might shock you. LGBTQ+ inmates are 10 times more likely to be sexually assaulted in prison than their heterosexual counterparts. But what the guards didn't know was that one of them was hiding a deadly secret that would cost another man his life. By the time the truth came out, it was already too late. This story takes place at Riverside Correctional Facility, a maximum security prison in the American Midwest. Built in 1987, this concrete fortress houses over 3,000 inmates behind razor wire and steel bars. It's here that our story unfolds, in a place where being different can mean the difference between life and death. 23-year-old Alex Thompson arrived at Riverside on a cold February morning in 2019. A first-time offender sentenced to 4 years for drug possession, Alex was everything that made someone a target in prison. Small-framed at 5'6" and weighing barely 140 pounds, he was openly gay and had never hidden his sexuality from anyone, including the intake officers who processed him that first day. He kept to himself, always drawing in a notebook. One guard would later testify. Alex had studied art in college before his addiction derailed his life. His mother, Patricia Thompson, had been supportive throughout his struggles, visiting him every week and putting money in his commissary account. His father had been absent since Alex came out at 16. But being openly gay in a maximum security prison isn't just difficult, it's dangerous. Let me share some statistics that might surprise you. According to the Bureau of Justice Statistics, 42% of women and 9% of men in prison identify as sexual minorities, compared to roughly 3 to 4% in the general population. These inmates face harassment, assault, and exploitation at rates that should shock any civilized society. Prison operates on an unforgiving hierarchy. At the top are the lifers and gang leaders who command respect through violence and connections. Below them are the career criminals who know how to navigate the system. At the bottom are the vulnerable, the young, the small, the different. And in prison culture, being gay automatically places you in that bottom tier. Being openly gay in prison is like wearing a target on your back, explains Dr. Patricia Williams, a criminologist who has studied LGBTQ+ experiences in correctional facilities for over 15 years. These inmates are seen as weak, as prey. The system is supposed to protect them, but too often it fails. Alex quickly learned this harsh reality. Within his first week, he was cornered in the shower by 3 inmates who made it clear what they expected from him. He reported the incident to a guard, who dismissed it as typical new inmate hazing. His requests for protective custody were denied. The prison was overcrowded, and protective custody cells were reserved for informants and high-profile cases. The harassment continued. His cell was searched daily by guards looking for contraband that never existed. Inmates would knock his food tray from his hands in the cafeteria. Someone wrote slurs on his cell door in permanent marker. And through it all, the guards treated these incidents as minor infractions, rather than the systematic targeting they represented. But Alex was about to meet someone who promised to change everything. Jason Mitchell was everything Alex wasn't. At 35, he stood 6'2" and weighed 220 pounds of muscle earned through 15 years of prison workouts. Serving a 20-year sentence for armed robbery, Jason had arrived at Riverside in 2010 and had quickly established himself as someone you didn't cross. But Jason had a reputation for something else, protecting vulnerable inmates. For a price. Jason had this way of making you think he was your friend, recalled Officer Tom Rodriguez, who worked the cell block where both men lived. He was charismatic, intelligent. He could quote Shakespeare 1 minute and threaten to break your jaw the next. Jason's criminal history painted a complex picture. Born in Detroit to a single mother, he'd been in and out of juvenile detention since age 14. His adult record included assault, theft, and finally the armed robbery that put him away for 2 decades. But in prison, he'd earned his GED and was working toward a bachelor's degree in psychology. What the prison records didn't show was Jason's pattern of relationships with younger, vulnerable inmates. Over the years, he'd formed protective arrangements with at least 4 different men, relationships that blurred the lines between genuine care and manipulation. The meeting happened in March 2019, during dinner in the main cafeteria. Alex was sitting alone, as usual, when 3 inmates approached his table. They knocked his tray to the floor and began making crude comments about what they planned to do to him later. That's when Jason intervened. "Is there a problem here?" Jason's voice cut through the cafeteria noise. The 3 inmates looked up to see all 6'2" of him standing behind them. "No problem, Mitchell. Just having some fun with the new kid." "Well, the fun's over. Move along." They did, immediately. In prison, Jason's word carried weight. He helped Alex clean up the spilled food and invited him to sit at his table. "You need protection in here," Jason told him quietly. "I can provide that, but it comes with expectations." "What are your thoughts so far? Do you think Jason was genuinely trying to help, or was this all part of a calculated plan? Leave your thoughts in the comments." The arrangement they worked out seemed simple enough. Jason would protect Alex from other inmates, and in return, Alex would provide companionship, someone to talk to, play chess with, share books. It seemed innocent, almost wholesome in the brutal environment of Riverside. But there was something Jason hadn't told Alex, something that would prove deadly. Jason was HIV positive. He'd been diagnosed in 2015 during routine prison medical screening. Under federal law, an inmate's medical information is strictly confidential, even from other inmates they might be intimate with. The prison medical staff knew, but they were legally prohibited from warning Alex or anyone else about Jason's status. HIV-positive inmates have the right to privacy, but at what cost? Asks Dr. Michael Chun, a medical ethicist who has written extensively about healthcare in correctional settings. When that privacy could literally be a matter of life and death for someone else, we have to question whether these laws are protecting people or endangering them. What Alex didn't know about Jason's medical history would soon become a matter of life and death. For 6 months, the arrangement worked exactly as promised. Jason's protection was absolute. No one bothered Alex as long as he was under Jason's wing. They spent hours together in the prison library, discussing books and philosophy. Jason helped Alex with his legal appeals, and Alex shared his artwork with Jason. Prison relationships operate under constant surveillance, but inmates find ways to connect. They would sit close together during meals, pass notes during work details, and find quiet corners of the yard for private conversations. Their relationship evolved from protection to something that looked genuinely romantic. In prison, relationships are intense because everything else is taken away, explains former inmate Robert Taylor, who served 12 years at various facilities. Love becomes magnified when it's all you have. Alex's mother noticed the change during her weekly visits. Her son seemed happier, more confident. He talked about Jason constantly, how intelligent he was, how he protected him, how they were planning to stay in touch after release. Patricia Thompson was relieved that her son had found someone to care about him in such a dangerous place. But what she couldn't see were the red flags that other inmates noticed. Jason was becoming increasingly possessive. He monitored Alex's mail, screening letters from family and friends. He controlled Alex's commissary spending, deciding what Alex could and couldn't buy. When other inmates tried to befriend Alex, Jason would intervene, making it clear that Alex was off limits. Prison relationships often mirror abusive patterns, magnified by the confined environment, explains Dr. Lisa Rodriguez, a psychologist who works with incarcerated populations. The isolation, the dependency, the power imbalances, they all contribute to relationships that can turn toxic very quickly. Fellow inmates began expressing concern. Alex was becoming isolated from everyone except Jason. He stopped participating in the art program he'd loved. He turned down visits from friends who made the long trip to see him. Slowly, systematically, Jason was cutting Alex off from every support system he had. But the most dangerous secret remained hidden. For 8 months, Alex had no idea that Jason was HIV positive. They had become intimate, and Jason never disclosed his status, never suggested protection, never gave Alex the information he needed to make informed decisions about his own health. That would all change on one October evening, when Alex overheard a conversation that shattered his world. He was walking past the medical unit when he heard Jason's voice through the partially open door. The prison doctor was adjusting Jason's antiretroviral medication, discussing viral loads and CD4 counts. Alex stood frozen in the hallway as the reality hit him. Jason was HIV positive, and he'd been hiding it for months. What followed was the argument that would seal both their fates. Alex confronted Jason that night in their shared area of the common room. Other inmates watched nervously as Alex demanded answers about the medical deception. Jason's response was swift and violent. He grabbed Alex by the throat and slammed him against the wall. "You don't know what you're talking about," Jason hissed. "And you better keep your mouth shut about things you don't understand." But Alex had finally found his voice. "You lied to me about everything. You put my life at risk. How many others have you done this to?" The confrontation marked the end of their relationship, but for Jason, it was just the beginning of a campaign of terror. Alex tried to distance himself, requesting a cell transfer and asking to be moved to a different work detail. But Riverside was overcrowded, and such requests took months to process. In the meantime, Jason's behavior escalated dramatically. He began making explicit threats about what would happen if Alex tried to expose him. "If I can't have you, no one can," he told Alex during one particularly heated exchange in the prison yard. Other inmates reported the threats to guards, but their concerns were dismissed as relationship drama. One incident report, later obtained through a civil lawsuit, showed a guard writing, "Inmates Mitchell and Thompson having relationship issues. Probably just need to cool off." Alex wrote desperate letters to his mother, begging her to help him get transferred to another facility. He was terrified, and he had good reason to be. In one letter, dated November 15, 2019, he wrote, "Mom, I'm scared. He knows things about me, about my case, about our family. He says if I try to leave him or tell anyone about his condition, he'll make sure I never make it out of here alive." But perhaps the most damning evidence of institutional failure came from the prison's own records. This wasn't the first time Jason had been involved in a volatile relationship with a vulnerable inmate. In 2016, another young man had requested protective custody after similar threats from Jason. In 2018, an inmate Jason had been protecting was found beaten unconscious in his cell after trying to end their relationship. This tragedy was entirely preventable with proper protocols, argues Maria Santos, director of the Prison Reform Initiative. The warning signs were there, the pattern was established, and the institution failed at every level to protect someone they knew was in danger. The final 24 hours began with Jason making one last attempt to reconcile. He wrote Alex a letter that alternated between apologies and threats, between declarations of love and promises of violence. Alex shared the letter with his cellmate, who later testified that Alex was terrified and couldn't stop shaking after reading it. That evening, Alex made his final phone call to his mother. The conversation lasted only 5 minutes, all they could afford on their phone account, but Patricia Thompson would remember every word for the rest of her life. "He told me he loved me," she would later testify through tears. "He said if something happened to him, I should know that he tried to do the right thing. I asked him what he meant, but the call cut off. I tried calling the prison, but they said he couldn't receive any more calls that day. But by morning, the guards would find a scene that would haunt them forever." Do you think the prison system failed Alex? What could have been done differently to prevent this tragedy? Share your thoughts in the comments below. At 6:47 a.m. on November 23, 2019, Officer Jennifer Walsh discovered Alex Thompson's body in the prison laundry room. He had been strangled with a bedsheet that had been twisted into a makeshift rope. The scene told a story of desperation and violence that shocked even veteran corrections officers. The evidence showed this was personal, a crime of passion and rage, testified forensic expert Dr. Robert Kim. The victim had defensive wounds on his hands and arms, indicating he fought for his life. The positioning of the body suggested the attack lasted several minutes. Security footage would later reveal that Alex had been forced into the laundry room at approximately 2:30 a.m. Jason was seen entering the room moments later, and neither man emerged alive. When guards found Jason in his cell 3 hours later, he was covered in scratches and had blood under his fingernails that DNA testing would confirm belonged to Alex. But Jason's first response to questioning wasn't denial, it was justification. He immediately confessed to killing Alex but claimed it was self-defense, saying Alex had attacked him with a weapon. The story fell apart when investigators found no weapon, and the forensic evidence contradicted every aspect of his account. The investigation revealed the premeditated nature of the crime. In Jason's cell, detectives found a journal with detailed entries about his growing rage toward Alex. One entry, dated 3 days before the murder, read, "He thinks he can just walk away from me. He thinks he can expose me and ruin my life. He's wrong. I'll shut him up permanently." They also discovered a cache of letters Jason had written but never sent, letters that detailed elaborate fantasies about hurting Alex and other inmates who had betrayed him. The evidence painted a picture of a man who had been planning violence for weeks. He planned this murder for weeks, testified Detective Maria Gonzalez, who led the investigation. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was calculated, premeditated murder designed to silence someone who threatened to expose the defendant's secrets. Other inmates came forward with testimony that further damaged Jason's case. They described his increasingly erratic behavior in the weeks before the murder, his explicit threats against Alex, and his history of violence against previous partners. But even as the criminal case developed, another story was emerging, the story of institutional failure and cover-up. Prison administrators immediately began damage control. Internal documents, later obtained through litigation, showed officials discussing how to minimize the prison's liability. Incident reports were altered to remove references to previous complaints about Jason's behavior. Video footage from certain areas of the prison mysteriously disappeared. They cared more about avoiding lawsuits than preventing deaths, testified Officer Michael Torres, a whistleblower who came forward with evidence of the cover-up. The administration knew Jason was dangerous, but they were more concerned about their own careers than protecting the inmates in their care. The truth about the prison's negligence was about to come to light in a very public forum. Jason Mitchell's trial began on September 14, 2020, with prosecutors charging him with first-degree murder and seeking a sentence of life without parole. The case drew national attention not just for the brutal nature of the crime, but for what it revealed about the treatment of LGBTQ+ inmates in America's prisons. Prosecutor Elizabeth Warren built her case around two central themes: premeditation and institutional failure. This was a calculated murder designed to silence the victim, she told the jury in her opening statement. The defendant used his HIV status as a weapon, then killed to cover up his crime. The HIV aspect of the case became central to the prosecution's argument. Medical experts testified about the legal and ethical obligations to disclose HIV status to sexual partners, even in prison settings. They explained how Jason's deliberate concealment constituted not just betrayal, but potential murder if Alex had contracted the virus. Defense attorney Robert Chin argued that Jason suffered from mental illness exacerbated by the brutal conditions of prison life. He painted his client as a victim of a system that dehumanizes inmates and creates violence through negligence and overcrowding. But the prosecution's case was overwhelming. The physical evidence, the premeditation shown in Jason's writings, and the testimony of fellow inmates created a picture of cold-blooded murder that the defense couldn't counter. The most powerful moment of the trial came when Alex's mother delivered her victim impact statement. Patricia Thompson, a quiet woman who had worked 2 jobs to support her son through his addiction struggles, spoke directly to Jason from the witness stand. "You took away the most precious thing in my life," she said, her voice steady despite her tears. Alex was trying to get his life back together. He was drawing again, making plans for when he got out. "You destroyed all of that because of your own selfishness and cruelty." The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning a guilty verdict on all counts. Judge Robert Martinez sentenced Jason to life in prison without the possibility of parole, but not before delivering a scathing assessment of the institutional failures that enabled the crime. "This facility failed in its most basic duty to protect those in its care," Judge Martinez stated. "While the defendant is solely responsible for this murder, the negligence of the prison system created the conditions that allowed it to happen." The criminal conviction was just the beginning of the legal consequences. Patricia Thompson filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the state, arguing that the prison's negligence directly contributed to her son's death. The case was settled in 2021 for $2.3 million, but more importantly, it forced systemic changes in how LGBTQ+ inmates are housed and protected. "No amount of money brings Alex back, but maybe this prevents another tragedy," said family attorney Rebecca Johnson. "The reforms we've secured through this settlement could save lives." The case sparked national attention to LGBTQ+ prisoner rights and led to congressional hearings on prison safety. New federal guidelines were implemented requiring enhanced protections for vulnerable inmates, mandatory reporting of threats, and improved training for correctional staff. Today, Jason Mitchell sits in solitary confinement at a maximum security facility, serving his life sentence. Prison reforms have been implemented, but advocates argue they remain insufficient to address the systemic problems that cost Alex Thompson his life. Current statistics paint a grim picture of ongoing violence against LGBTQ inmates. 85% of LGBTQ prisoners still experience solitary confinement, often placed there allegedly for their own protection, but effectively punishing them for their identity. 53% of transgender inmates report sexual abuse during their incarceration. We've made progress, but there's still so much work to do, explains Dr. Patricia Williams, the criminologist we heard from earlier. Alex's case brought attention to these issues, but changing a system this massive takes time and sustained pressure. The reforms implemented after Alex's death include enhanced intake screening to identify vulnerable inmates, mandatory training for all correctional staff on LGBTQ issues, and new protocols for investigating and responding to threats between inmates. But critics argue these measures don't address the fundamental culture of violence and neglect that pervades many correctional facilities. Now I want to hear from you. Do you think the prison staff should face criminal charges for their negligence? What reforms would prevent tragedies like this? How can we better protect vulnerable inmates while they serve their sentences? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more true crime stories that expose the failures in our justice system. Alex Thompson's story reminds us that behind prison walls are human beings deserving of safety, dignity, and protection. His death was not just a failure of one institution, but a reflection of a system that too often treats LGBTQ lives as expendable. Until we change that system, Alex's tragic love story will not be the last. The next time you hear someone dismiss prison violence as inevitable, remember Alex Thompson. Remember that he was someone's son, someone who drew pictures and dreamed of a better life. Remember that the systems we build reflect our values, and the protections we provide reveal who we believe deserves to live safely. Alex's death was preventable. The question is, will we learn from it, or will we continue to let vulnerable people suffer behind bars while we look the other way? The answer to that question will determine how many more families will face the devastating loss that Patricia Thompson lives with every day. This has been the story of Alex Thompson and Jason Mitchell, a prison love story gone wrong that exposed the deadly failures of our correctional system. Thank you for listening, and remember, justice isn't just about punishment. It's about protection, dignity, and the fundamental belief that every life has value, even behind bars.